Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. My name is Tandy, and I'm joined today by Katie and Lisa. And we are back for Beer Lingo. We are on our second episode of Beer Lingo Explained. And in our last episode, we spoke about the way that beer is described. So, beer descriptors, things like flavors and aromas, and the way that we talk about beer. And today, we're going to go a little bit more technical. We're going to talk about some brewing terms. It'll probably still be kind of some of the basics, but that's okay. We've got to start somewhere. And we've sort of also chosen words that are just fun to say. These are words that are a little bit, well, they're tickling, aren't they? They tickle us in some or other way. So
I like the way you say tickling. It's like, what could that mean?
Because there really are some very funny sounding words, when it comes to beer brewing, whether you're tasting it or making it, there's some really interesting words all around. So we're going to focus on some of the weirder sounding ones, but try and keep it to brew day only. And we will go largely in order of how you actually brew. So for homebrewers, everywhere at home, maybe you're brewing while you're listening. Some of these might make sense to you. Maybe you know them. Some of them might be new to you. So we will see. But before we go into all of our funny sounding words, let's talk about what we're drinking. And just before we do that, we're just going to remind you all that all of our back catalog and social media links are all on our website. So we're beerladies.com. And we're at Beer Ladies Pod on Twitter, Mastodon, Instagram, Facebook, all the things. Find us there. Links to merch, links to buying us coffee. It's all there. So, okay, friends, what are we drinking? Lisa, let's start with you.
So I was in Belfast this past weekend, and I brought back a bunch of local beers, some of which you can get some of here, but some of which I've only seen up there. So I have Beer Hut Brewing Company, Drop It Like It's Hop. So I hope we all see what they did there.
Who doesn't love a punny beer?
Oh no, we're here for it. We're here for it. So they are up in County Down. So excited to see this one. It is a pale ale, although I'm holding it up. It is certainly more on the hazy side, although there's definitely oats in there. They're very clear. Water, barley, oats, wheat, hops, yeast. Hops are Mosaic, Huguenot, and Motueka. So very exciting there. But yeah, it's only 4.3%, so nothing too crazy. Good for a school night. And
there you go. I heard Tandy's least favorite hop being mentioned there.
But no, it's nice.
My least favorite hop.
It's nice.
You know what was very funny is that I was speaking to somebody recently, and for the life of me, I can't remember because clearly beer. But we were talking about the fact that Huguenot, which used to be called Equinox,
right.
had, I think it was Rich from the NHC. And apparently the hop company or the growers who make it are adamant that this hop does not taste like green pepper, as in, yeah. And whereas I've maintained that I can taste that hop a mile off and it tastes like green pepper to me and I can distinguish it all the time. And he told me that there was a batch during some period, I think in the mid 2000s or 2010s, which apparently did taste like green pepper. So potentially I had one of those batches in a beer that I saw lightning. Yay, sorry,
yes,
distraction.
It's happening.
We were all just commenting for everybody listening that we've got thunder and lightning today in Ireland, which is not that common. So we're all excited.
No. So yeah, if you see some editing in the video, you'll know it's because our power got cut and someone had to go away and come back.
But apparently that hop does not taste like green pepper, and that everybody is having a bit of a kind of collective memory effect of the fact that this hop tastes like green pepper. I disagree, but we'll see. You tell me, Lisa, if you can taste it.
I'm not getting green pepper from it, but it is very in the tropical side of things. Although I did pick up some other beers that are much more sort of old school West Coast, but those are in my fridge, saving them for the weekend. So excited to do a compare contrast though. But yeah, definitely I had a fair few things that were new to me while I was up there, even though it was only a 22-hour trip, but priority. Still got in a couple decent beers. Although, funny story, and anyone who follows me on Instagram will have seen it. I asked for a local beer, and they brought me a harp. So that was glorious.
Belfast.
Yes, and that was, when the fellow brought it, I had to do it. Really? He's just sort of shrugged, and that was, fine. We were with a big group, but I did get other beer that was local
beer.
and was good, but the harp was just funny. So there you go. Ask for a specific local beer when in Belfast, folks. Don't leave it to chance.
Is it even brewed in Belfast, though? Is it part of it?
I think at one point it was. I don't know if it still is.
Okay.
So it was brewed in Dundalk.
Same.
Maybe.
Which I guess is
Maybe.
slightly further, it's close enough to the border, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, you'd have to really work to make it more local than, the several other things that are brewed literally like around the corner from where I was. But technicalities. And again, I did have a lovely time, and everything else I had at a proper, beer bar or, craft beer pub got me good stuff, but I did think that was funny. So shout out to Harp, the local beer of Belfast. So
I love it.
Oh, that's
But
great.
I digress. Katie,
what you drinking?
What am I drinking? Can you see my can? I am drinking a Maibock
Nice.
from Hope.
I love that. It was so good.
Oh, how wonderful.
My second week in a row drinking a Bock on the pod.
Yes.
I know.
What does it mean?
What means I love Bocks.
Yeah, we don't get them often enough. So
yeah. So this is a special limited edition, number 29. And what does it say? Alcohol 7.5%. I've just had a quick taste. Yeah. It's probably not a Monday night beer, but anyway.
But here we are.
There's IBU 34, color 17, EBC. What's EBC? Something.
The color scale.
Something color.
Mm.
There we go. And you pair it with sausages, pork, game, camembert cheese. There you go. There's a list of pairings.
That's nice that they've given you pairings.
Oh yeah, there's a whole little history of what is a Maibock. And our host from last season was in Germany, and I saw that she posted that she was at a Maibock Fest, and I'm like,
yes,
Erica.
Oh, Erica, I'm jealous.
I'm jealous. I love Maibocks.
Yeah, Maibocks are lovely. And for May, so it's the perfect season for a Maibock.
Yes.
And they only really come out now this time of year anyway. Nice one, Katie. I'm going to have to look that one up.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to find it.
This is what it looks like for those watching.
Oh, that's a lovely
beautiful,
deep amber color. Very red, really.
Yeah, I think it might look a bit darker on
maybe.
the camera than it is in reality. But
yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Most good. Well, I've also stuck local. I have got Kinnegar, Limeburner Pale Ale. Recently, I was thinking about the fact that you don't seem to find a lot of pale ales anymore, or maybe I'm imagining this. But you see a lot of session IPAs, hazy IPAs. You see a lot of IPAs in general, and some of them could really be in pale ale territory. But I just thought I'm going to try and find a couple of pale ales because, in a way, I want to remember what the difference is. Also very handy because I am going off to judge London Amateur Brewers this week, and so I've decided that for the days this week, I'm going to drink a few beers, practice my BJCP note-taking and scoring, and I did this one before the pod, so, whatevs. But here it is. It's quite pale. It's like a pale gold. It's got a bit of haze to it, and when it pours, it's got a beautiful head, quite a frothy, thick head, and it dissipates, but it stays, which is nice for a pale ale. And this one has definitely got some decent bitterness. And if you go and read my blog, you can go and see that I don't think it has enough hop aroma and hop flavor, but that's okay. It's still a lovely beer and I'm enjoying it.
And handy, is your blog linked from our Beer Ladies podcast website?
It's not actually.
Come on, get on that.
I'll put it into the show notes, but it's craftgeeksa.com. So there we are. And Lisa, give your blog a shout out here too, please, since there are two of us.
Depending what's easier for people to find, I'm either at lisagrim.com, which I think is easy, or possibly easier for some people to remember. You can also get it at weirdbeergirl.com. It just redirects. It's magic. So
there it is. So, okay, friends, let's talk about some brewing terms. And I'll start us off with the first one. And the first one is wort, which is kind of a funny word because it's spelt W-O-R-T instead of W-E-R-T, but it's pronounced wort, not wart. and it's not a wart on your foot, it's wort. So wort, we've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, as one does, but wort is the liquid that beer is before the yeast is added. So it's basically got your grains in it that have been strained off, your hops in it that have been boiled, and there's kind of a common saying that brewers make wort and yeast makes beer. So that's how you can think of it.
I like that. That'd be a nice, instead of live, life, love, you can have brewers make wort, yeast makes beer on your wall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it helps to have at least, tried home brewing here and there, because when you try those non-alcoholic beers that are not very good, which most of them were for ages, they taste like wort. It's like tasting kind of your unfermented, just sort of tea bag of beer, or what will be beer. But now there are better ones out there that don't taste like wort, but that is still my low bar for any non-alcoholic beer that doesn't hit the mark. It just tastes like wort, and then we're done. So
and it's the baseline, because what wort really is it's all of the sugars and all of the hop flavors and aromas and oils and everything into this liquid. So if you taste wort, it tastes sweet. And it's because the yeast needs to eat that sugar to be able to ferment it, creating both CO2 and also alcohol. So it tastes sweet. And that's why non-alcoholic beers sometimes are just a lot sweeter, and they taste, if you've ever had Horlicks is a malted drink, and that's what wort smells like and tastes like before you add hops. And that's the only way I can really describe it, is like Horlicks.
That's a really apt. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. It's it's much of a muchness too. Like, it's very one note. Which again, after the lovely fermentation happens, you get all these other colors that come out, but they're not there in your wort. So.
Indeed. So on to the next one then. We could go to sparging, and that's one of the next steps in the brewing process. Lisa, do you want to tell us what sparging is?
Oh gosh. So I'm also going to talk about making beer with no sparge methods, but a little bit here and there. But no, you go on, because this is one of those things where I'm like, I memorized it for BJCP and I know where it happens and when it happens, but I haven't done it in a long time. So
that's all good. That's all good.
And I have done no homework for this episode. So.
And I know you brewed recently. Yeah.
Tandy, you're gonna do this.
That's grand. So sparging is the step that happens after the mash, and the mash is the very first step of making beer, which is when you put your grains into your water and heat it up and let the sugars come out. Sparging is when you basically lift or remove the grains from the mash, and what you're really doing is pouring on more water at a sort of maximum temperature of 72 degrees Celsius. And what you're doing is you're rinsing the grains. You're trying to get all of the leftover sugars and the leftover proteins and things from the grains. You're rinsing them so that you've got a slightly fuller volume in your boil kettle, and to get your maximum flavor out of and your maximum efficiency, which is another handy term here, your efficiency in your mash. It's to maximize your efficiency, which means taking out the maximum amount of fermentable sugars from your grains. So sparging is just rinsing. So it's just jugs of water, often about a liter at a time, that you're pouring over your grain bed. It helps to filter, it filters through the grain bread, goes down into the kettle, and it takes with it all the leftover sugars. It also can help to clarify things later on, but I'm not going to make bold claims. The real bit is to get all the sugars so that you've got lots of nice fermentable things for your yeast babies.
And babies. It's like spider babies. Sorry, go on.
We're all very giddy, aren't we? It's great.
Must be the lightning and thunder.
Yeah.
So a home brewer on a really small setup, would they sparge? Yeah. So
it depends on how you're doing it. So if you're using something like a Grainfather or a Grainmaster, one of these kind of all-in-one kits, what it is that there's a kind of a basket inside your main kettle that holds your grains, and you lift this basket. It's quite heavy. You lift this basket because it's got a lot of water and grain in it. Call it 5 to 7 kilograms of grain plus the water weight. So you're lifting it out, and you almost sit it on top of your kettle. It often has a bit of a shift where legs will sit onto little shelves, and the height of the kettle then almost doubles, and then you start pouring your water over once it's drained all the way through, and you just keep pouring until you've got to your desired pre-boil volume, and that's it. And you hope that your efficiency is good. And your efficiency is obviously related. It's how much of the grain sugars did you get from the grain, from the malt. So if you've had a good efficiency day, at a homebrew level, good efficiency could be 70% efficient. So what's left over in the grains is in and around 30% of the sugars. At brew house levels, so commercial levels, they'd go probably even a bit higher in terms of efficiency. You'd probably get 80 to 85% efficiency. Now, one of the ways that homebrewers can go wrong is by not testing the efficiency of their mash. So if you're testing along the way, so what happens is you've put your grains, your malt into your water, you've now sparged, or you could take samples just before you sparge, just after you sparge. There's ways to do this. If you're finding that your beers are coming out and they're a bit thin, or they're a bit overly dry, or they don't quite have the body, they don't quite have the fullness for what you had, it's often due to mash efficiency. So one of the biggest solutions, I guess, or one of the biggest suggestions is to make sure that you're stirring a lot during your mash, especially when you add your grains in first, your malts, because they tend to clump together, and then the water doesn't penetrate and doesn't get all of those lovely sugars out. So make sure to add your grains in slowly, stir often, and keep it circulating either with your technology, your kit, or by using a spoon. So whether you're doing it on a stove and you've just got a bag that you're pulling up, and you could rinse them, but a lot of people that are doing small batches don't really sparge, because you'll have a much lower grain to water ratio to begin with.
Yeah.
So you've got a better chance of getting all those sugars out the first time. Whereas if you're making a very big beer, or if you're using these kits that are taking 30 liters and you're putting 8 kilograms of grain in, you do need to sparge, definitely.
Yeah, like we rarely do because we try to make things in such small amounts, like, sort of a 3-gallon kit. We have something like that, but it's not worth it to do it most of the time. So I'm always like, that's that thing that we never do, but you could.
So yeah, a lot of people don't sparge, and there are plenty of experiments out there for even lagers, and it doesn't matter what kind of beer, where what you do is, instead of adding, let's say, a ratio of 4 parts water to 1 part grain, you add a lot more. You almost fill your kettle, and regardless of how much grain you've got or malt you've got, and just skip the sparge. I think a lot of people like that. I've only ever tried it once, and it happened to be on a double brew day, and that was my second brew, and it just didn't come out right anyway. So I just didn't go back to that. But there are plenty of people that do no sparge, and all it is adding more water in their initial mash, and then you don't need to rinse the grains as much or at all.
And it's a fun word to say. So
it is, by the way, the most painful, annoying part of a homebrew day is sparging, because you're doing it kind of 1 liter at a time, and you're adding often about 18 liters. It could be 14 or 18 liters depending on how much you've got left and how much you need. It takes a while, and it's a little bit thankless, but I do think it's better for efficiency, and most people will still sparge even if they only halve it. So you can play around with that, by playing with your initial volume of water. You can play around with how much you need to sparge. If you were only sparging 7 liters, fair enough, it wouldn't be as time consuming. Yeah. And then related to a sparge, I'm sneaking a word in here, is a stuck sparge.
Ooh, stuck sparge.
So, stuck sparge. So this is every brewer's and home brewer's worst nightmare. It is when you are rinsing your grains, you're sparging, but nothing is coming out the bottom. Ooh. So effectively, something's happening within this grain bed, and it's stuck. Now, this happens often if you're doing recipes that have got a lot of wheat or a lot of oats, so very protein-rich, gelatinous type grains, and it's because they kind of they form this almost gelatinous coagulation, and that doesn't let water pass through. And so a stuck sparge is everyone's worst nightmare, because the way that you combat it is you could almost poke holes into your grain bed, but then you lose efficiency, or you can try and stir the grain bed, which can help, but it's time consuming. The best way to prevent it is to use rice hulls, and rice hulls are really just, they're the outside husk of rice, and they add no flavor, they don't add sugars or anything to the beer, but what they do is it's like adding fiber to your oats, even though your oats are fibrous. It's like adding psyllium husk or something. It cuts through the sort of gelatinous nature of these protein-rich malts, and it makes drainage a lot easier. And so you need to almost put in your rice hulls, let them soak up, and actually the best tip is to put them in first before the rest of your grains. When you're mashing, just know that if you're doing 50% wheat in your beer, like with a Weiss, sometimes a Saison has got that much wheat, put your rice hulls in first, let them hydrate, then add the rest of your grains in. And that helps a lot, because to have the rice hulls in between all of your other grain bits helps it to drain and sparge a lot easier in the end.
Yeah.
Pro tip.
I feel like it's like little kids who all want to talk to each other and not listen to the teacher. And the rice hulls are like adults in between them going,
yes,
talking to each other.
That's it. That's it.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. So the next word in our list, I think it sounds like something from a Doctor Who episode. Partaguile.
Okay, so that may be why I like it, because it does sound incredibly nerdy, and it does go sort of speak to kind of historical brewing techniques, but also just kind of, frankly, doing this on the cheap in some ways too, because, even though it looks like such a fun word, or sort of hyphenated word, partaguile, it's really just, you're getting multiple beers from this single mash. So that could be 2 beers, that could be 3 beers. Again, we'll get into sort of the sparging piece here as well, but basically you've done like this initial mash, and the idea is you can use this one grain bill to make all kinds of different beers, whether it's just sort of the first runnings of one that's going to be a stronger version of something, and then the second runnings where you are going to sparge, like we were just talking about, then you might have kind of your table beer that you're making from that. So you might have, for example, kind of, let's say what would have been kind of your classic sort of, just very broadly, like your ale and then your table beer, just very, very sort of generic almost. And there's certainly a lot of evidence that this has been done, frankly, since like time immemorial, because it's cheap, and this way you're getting the most use out of what you have ingredients wise. But nowadays, and again, when we look at it from a homebrewing perspective, people try to get more complicated with it and try to say, okay, well, the first one is going to be this, but the second one will be this, and we can even use different yeasts and just go to town with, still using this initial same mash, but then saying, like, for example, the first one might be a Weizenbock, but then we'll do a Dunkelweizen with the second. Or I'm looking at some of the other examples, like the first one might be a barley wine and the second one will be a pale ale, just depending on what your initial base ingredients were, and then, what you're trying to get out of it from a kind of ABV perspective. But it's a kind of one of these things too, though, that also, like, if people go back and listen to our episode with Martin Cornell, there's a lot of myths around this kind of thing too, because you also get the idea that, oh, this would have been made and set aside, and then this would have been blended, and then et cetera, and that's probably true in some cases. But a lot of this is probably when people were making beer on sort of a household or, say, estate level, they would have done, your first runnings, second runnings, third runnings, but then it's still all kind of, broadly speaking, the same beer, just at different strengths. But I do think it's interesting that it's come back into homebrewing, but with this extra degree of difficulty where we're trying to get different things from it, like, noticeably different things, not just different strengths. So I don't know, Tandy, if you've ever played around with it, because I feel like, does it really work? Because I can definitely see you're going to get stronger version, weaker version. Fair play. But I've never certainly tinkered around with, like, let's do a different yeast in this one, or let's do,
no.
Like, it seems like a lot of work.
There's a lot of people that will do a split batch, but it won't be a partaguile. So what they'll do is they'll mash, and they'll take that initial liquid, split it into 2, and then add a different set of hops and maybe even a different yeast strain, and then compare them side by side. Because, if you want to test something like your malt flavors or whatever the case is, or you want to see the interaction between different kinds of hops or different kinds of yeasts with the same base, that's perfectly normal. There's another way to split it. So after your boil, once you've got your hops in, you could split it and test two different strains of yeast. So that's different from Partagal, as Lisa said. So, you're taking your mash, and your first runnings, it's almost like whiskey, isn't it? But it's not
exactly.
Quite.
Similar idea, though.
Yeah. But your first runnings is probably going to be your most efficient. It's taken the most sugars and fermentable starches out of your grain, taking that away, and then taking the same grain bed and mashing it again, potentially sparging it again, and now you've got a different level of efficiency, so probably a much lower one. I can't imagine ever doing this unless I was desperate to sort of save the money, or I had loads of time in terms of preserving my malt. But I've got to be honest, malt is not the most expensive brewing ingredient. So I don't know if maybe I would one day do this, but I've never done it. It would be interesting though, because, as we said, sometimes your efficiency at a homebrew level can be 60% or 70%. 70 is quite good. If you were trying to get the other 40 or 35% out of your grains, there's a very good reason that you might want to do that, because it'll make a lower strength beer that you can hop differently, yeast differently, or add different yeast to. You can get a totally different beer out of it. Now, I wouldn't be as attached to the first beer must be X style and the second one must be Y style, or the third be Z style. It would be much more interesting to me to see what you come out with in terms of your pre-boil gravity, and then decide how it might work. But if you're using a lot of specialty malts, or if you're quite invested in your malt profile, maybe you do want to reuse and get every single bit of sugar out of it. Why not? But I've never tried.
Never tried, no. But Katie, I like your idea that could be like a really good Doctor Who villain, just Partagal. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
So
I do like that too.
Yeah. Also, a great drag name. Just saying, people need like drag brewing names. Just it's right there for you. So
we could do Pellicle Partagal.
I like it. Oh. Good times.
Okay. Let me look. What is next? Decoction mash.
Which again is a fun thing to say.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the obviousness of why this word is in should be apparent. Decoction mash.
Tan, now it makes sense. We don't all live in the gutter like you do, Andy. I'll have you know, I'm a woman of upstanding.
Clutch those pearls, Katie. Clutch them. Decoction. So decoction mash is another technique, and we've glossed over this a few times in different episodes.
Yeah.
And anyway, decoction is when you take a part of your mash. So once you're mashing in, your grains are getting all the sugars out. You take a part of this and you go and boil it separately from the rest of your volume. And what you're doing is you're intensifying the malt flavors in this smaller portion of the of the mash that you've taken out. You're reducing the volume, concentrating it, and intensifying it before you add it back in to your main volume, your main mash. And what that does is it adds to the flavor without adding alcohol strength or heaviness or unnecessary or unwanted kind of off flavors from overdoing it, overdoing your mash. So a lot of pilsners are done this way, and that's a really interesting one, because a pilsner is effectively, it's a lager, it's light. Why on earth should you need such malt intensity? But you do, because it is quite a crisp beer that is easy to drink, but it's very malt prominent. Your first sort of flavors are quite heavy on the sort of grain sweetness that comes from a pilsner. And the only way that you'd get that without adding a whole bunch of alcohol is to do a decoction. Yeah. So it's just another technique to change or alter the flavor of your grains without changing the overall effect.
Yeah, and if you want to have fun, you can throw some lager brewers in a room together and have them argue whether or not it's necessary anymore. Because historically, it made sense. There were a lot of reasons to do this.
Yeah.
On paper,
Well,
you don't really have to, but other people will insist that if you don't, it's different. So
yes. So the reason that the debate is alive is because the way that kind of genetic engineering and breeding programs for all these different malts have gone is that your Pilsner malts especially have been so altered over the years that you really shouldn't need to do this anymore. You know, in the same way that a lot of people debate whether you really need to boil for 90 minutes or more as opposed to 60 minutes with Pilsner malt, because it used to, or it's known to give off DMS, dimethyl sulfide. I'm not going to get that one right, you know, on a whim, but it can give off a lot of like sulfury flavors. It's very natural, but if you boil it for longer, it can dissipate away. Now, theoretically, you don't need to do these things because the grains have been kind of altered over time to not really need this. I think you do get some people that are firmly believe that follow the traditional steps because it'll get you the best results. Some people don't do it at all. Some people do kind of quick and dirty pilsners, and they probably taste great. I would say your mileage might vary. Try it your own way.
Here. Yeah.
And
see what works.
I have seen it on a beer can where it was a double decoction beer and they called it a double brewed.
Oh.
And you were like, double brewed, really?
Remember,
funny.
No, marketing, I'm sorry, but can marketing please stop getting involved? Please.
Well, and traditionally you would find actually triple decoction more common a lot of times than double, but you're not going to go out and say it because it's just what's happening under the hood, you know, more or less.
It's part of the brewing.
Yeah, exactly.
So why would you give away your secrets? You know,
Yes.
if that's what's setting your beer apart, don't go and tell everybody. Just do it and be quiet about it. They'll wonder what wizardry is happening in your brew house.
Exactly. Yeah, air of mystery. There we go. Leave them wanting more.
But it's a weird thing. I don't know if it's brewers who want this kind of technicality on the cans because they want to appeal to other brewers or home brewers or aspirational brewers, or if it's kind of marketing, and maybe I'm being unfair to sort of marketing, or if it's just like, let's choose a buzzword and just stick it on. But who is it impressing? I don't know. Maybe it would tell somebody who knows quite a lot about beer, like why it might have a slightly richer flavor, even though it's got a low ABV. But maybe it could just be a wonderful mystery. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I've talked with a brewer about this, and I will not say who it was, but no one here, someone in America, but he was like, yeah, we used to do it that way. And then we stopped because it just wasted everyone's time and it made absolutely no difference to the final product. But for ages, it said that we did it. So we had to do it because that was kind of the recipe and the technique they had inherited from previous brewer. But then they sort of quietly changed it and no one noticed. So, but they had the same thing though. They had to change the marketing because it was in there somewhere. Yes. So there you go.
That's actually interesting. I've never thought about people getting stuck, you know, almost getting held to a standard just because it says something. That's hilarious.
Yeah. If you inherit that recipe, do you keep it or do you start to tinker and then say, look, lads, we made some changes, but you didn't notice. So
yeah.
There you go.
But there you go.
Nice.
I love an old clinical trial.
Right?
In a brewery.
Yes. And they have a lot of
drink this. Are they the same? Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't know us.
No. And they had, years of control group and then changed it. All good. So it works.
Good one. What are we defining next?
Next it is, I would pronounce this trub.
Trub. Yeah.
Trub or trub?
From the German. And to me, like, when you are brewing at home, it's much more noticeable. Well, I'm sure it's very noticeable in your big commercial brewery because it's making a bigger mess. But when you're brewing at home, like the bottom of your pretty glass carboys, which is also kind of a fun word, carboy, just, but it just ends up covered with the sort of sediment schmutz. And I tend to keep me honest. I want to say it's sort of what's all filtered down your kind of bits of fatty stuff, proteins that didn't take done.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just
it's kind of everything. So what happens when your beer is fermenting is that the yeast is active. It's eating sugars, but it's also leaving behind some things that are not fermentable. So within your sugars, there's kind of simple and complex sugars, and some can be broken down and some can't, and it depends on your malts. Let's keep it as simple as possible. Your trub or your trub is all of the sediment and the leftover kind of material that the yeast is not necessarily using, or it's done with, and it settles at the bottom of your fermenter because it's heavier than the liquid above it. So it can contain proteins, it can contain hop particles. So if you've dry hopped, you're adding hops back into your fermenter, and then they disperse their oils and things, but then the actual material sort of floats down. It almost flocculates and coagulates, and then it drops because it's heavier.
Did I hear other words there? Did I hear other words that we might define?
Indeed. We'll just add them all in, flocculate and coagulate and all these good terms. I mean, coagulate, if you have cooked before, or if you've had terrible shooters before, you might know what coagulation is. So if you mix a milky thing with an acidic thing, it can effectively break up the proteins in the milky thing.
Anything with Baileys.
Yeah.
It's
Women's
always Baileys.
Revenge, terrible shooter, which was, yes, a Baileys or the like, and then something acidic like a, apple cider. Well, it could be anything, and it just breaks it all up into something. It becomes kind of cottage cheesy, which sounds terrible, or egg drop soupy. So those kind of proteins kind of stick together, but they're not immersed or well blended or emulsified into the liquid. So all of your bits and bobs can coagulate at different times, and then either drop out or stay in suspension, depending on the size of the particles. And then your flocculation is how much the yeast kind of binds to these different particles and then weighs it down and drops it down. So a yeast that's got good flocculation is one that sort of clears the beer quite well, and a badly flocculating yeast can sort of keep it a bit in suspension. So depending on the style you're going for, you would choose a yeast that's got a low, moderate, or high flocculation rate, whereas coagulation, it just depends on your base ingredients. But you can combat it. You can help this sort of trub or this trub settle nicely into something that's a bit more compact by using finings during your boil. And finings, one example is Irish moss. Some people use gelatin. Some people some people even use bentonite clay. Yep, Katie.
Irish moss, the thing that grows like on the wall, or is it?
It's a seaweed.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so it's a seaweed. It's a seaweed, and I think it's similar, if not the same, to carrageen. I don't know if that
they're related. Yeah,
they're related.
I have picked carrageen from the rocks.
There. See, then you're.
I have dried it on the land.
And this is an important point too, because this is one of the things that can make your beer vegan or not vegan, if that's a concern for whoever might be drinking it. Because again, your point, Tandy, about the gelatin, or if you're using bits of fish, which a lot of people are commercially, to do that fining. But you could be using your Irish moss, again, which is not actually moss, but that way it's going to be vegan. The others are not. So you may have to check your label if that is something you are concerned about, because you might think, well, what's not vegan about beer? Well, actually, quite a few things can happen there. So worth checking your label or asking your brewer. So
there you go. Yeah. I didn't know that. We used to actually we used to pick the carrageen, dry it in the fields, and then sell like little bags of it.
Yeah.
And it was a home remedy. So you would boil it up and it would all coagulate and it would turn into this like white soupy thing. And it was great for everything and anything.
Yeah.
You're told, just drink, just eat it. Didn't really taste great, but sure. Did anything taste great in Ireland back in the 80s? I don't think so.
So, I mean, the way that these findings work is that sometimes they've got a lot to do with chemistry that I can't explain, but to do with positive and negative charges and ions and things. But let's just call it, they attract all of these sort of heavier particles and they kind of lump together and then they drop because they're heavy. So these kinds of things can help to clear your beer, but it also helps to keep the trub or the trub like quite compact, which is handy because if you're going to be moving your beer or taking it off that initial yeast cake, which is your yeast, your trub, everything is kind of sitting at the bottom of your beer, you almost want it to be as condensed and as tightly packed as possible before you move your beer off into a bright tank or into a conditioning bucket or whatever else you're doing with it, or even bottling straight from it. You want it to be quite tightly compacted. Otherwise, you get little bits of this into your beer, and it's just not the best experience. It's not going to kill you, but it's just not the nicest thing.
Yeah, and there are certainly bottle conditioned styles that have plenty of stuff floating around in your bottle, whether that's bits of old yeast or some of this as well. So certainly some certain Belgian ones, German ones. Very normal, don't freak out, but be aware that that's what you're getting. But yeah, it will not kill you, it's fine. Just watch how you pour.
Yep.
There we go. Will we move from there onto breaks of different temperatures? A hot break and a cold break.
So hot break and cold break. When you are you've sparged, and now what you've got is your kettle, which is really, it's just your container that you're boiling your wort in. It's not wort until you've added hops, but fine. When you're boiling, you've added your hops and it's coming up to temperature. What you'll see as a brewer is that you start to get kind of foam and things happening. It's almost like cooking pasta. When pasta gets foamy, and in a way you don't want it to overboil and spill all over, or the same with potatoes. So you start to get these kind of breaks, and it's often got proteins or it's carbohydrates. It's all these little bits and bobs that are just getting activated and coagulating and doing all sorts of things while it's getting up to temperature. So your hot break is what happens when you're boiling. You're raising the temperature. The hot break can be broken up by your slotted spoon while you're boiling, and it does just fine. It'll go settle down into the trub afterwards. No stress at all. But it's just a normal part of the boiling process. It happens as things are heating up. And then your cold break is what happens if you don't cool quick enough, if you don't cool your wort quick enough. Now, there are a lot of people who brew out there that don't cool their wort down quickly, and that's okay. You do you. But if you are looking for clear beers that don't have suspended particles of proteins, yeast, hops, all the different bits and bobs, you really want to cool it quickly. So when you don't cool it quickly enough, you get what is called a cold break, and that is at around 60 degrees Celsius, I think, where again your proteins start to almost denature and come into their own different forms, because it's not being dropped out by a quick cool. They've been allowed to be suspended. Now, that can have an effect on the look and the mouthfeel of your beer. It's not going to kill you, but sometimes people will talk about it having slightly more fusel alcohols or slightly more of a DMS flavor and aroma sort of hidden in these particles. So I'd recommend do a cold crash as opposed to a slow overnight cooling. But again, you do you. Figure out your own beer and what you like. Yeah, but both breaks are just proteins and carbohydrates that are getting natured, denatured, and kind of changing at different temperatures along the way.
I know, and it's like at different temperatures, their hands. This is how I picture. I have a degree in chemistry. This is how I got through college, by picturing molecules and atoms as like having different hands. So these are like their charges, and it's like, oh, I want to hold you, or I'm going to push you away. And
damn, Katie, I wish you'd been my chemistry teacher, because
I would have done
I couldn't get better.
That. No,
I got it. Something clicked in my head, and it all made perfect sense to me. It's like, do I work in it now? No, but
chemistry made no sense to me.
Yeah,
it made the least sense of all the subjects. Like, oh.
So basically,
couldn't understand it.
If you're attracting something, you're putting out your hand, and if you're,
repelling it,
difference between a positive and a negative charge. That's the way I pictured it in my head. There you go.
See, we all just needed better instruction. Okay, yeah, rethinking.
Okay. Next
it's a storytelling. I think that's what we need.
Okay, Pellicle. Let's move on to Pellicle, who is the name of a famous beer magazine.
That too.
It is. It is. Shout out to Pellicle.
Yes. But back to chemistry. So
gosh, back to chemistry. So a pellicle is kind of a strange one because for some beers it's very desirable. For other beers it is the absolute pits, and you'll be throwing that beer out. A pellicle is effectively, it's like a bacterial biofilm that covers the top of your fermenter, whether it's a carboy or a bucket or whatever the case is. It grows because your fermenter's been exposed to a lot of oxygen. Typically when you're fermenting, you want to keep oxygen out unless you're trying to do things like souring or, adding deliberately funky, weird flavors.
Right, on purpose.
Whether it be, on purpose as opposed to accidental. So a lot of people, if they see a pellicle forming, it starts out like a bit of a shiny film, but it becomes really alien looking, and it can form the weirdest, coolest shapes on top of your beer. And what it's doing is I don't know what it actually does, but I think it kind of feeds from the oxygen. It sours and does bacterially things into your beer, but it's the guardian now of your beer.
Yeah,
and I suppose shout out to any commercial breweries that just do open fermenting when they're not doing sour beers.
Ooh, that would be scary.
Their cleaning processes must be.
It's got to be. And what surprised me looking into it more was how kind of understudied this is. Like, people don't really know what triggers some of these things, or what kind of, like, what's the catalyst, or what stops some of them. So it's all like we think it might be this, but it's really kind of understudied. So that's fascinating to me, that you would expect that all your big breweries would have been, paid all this money to do the research decades ago, because they didn't want that most of the time. But you think that now there's so much more interesting kind of sour beers that we would have nailed this down scientifically, but it's all kind of magic.
Like, I am seeing this whole beer episode of Doctor Who coming together. Something is going to come from the pellicle.
Ooh. The curse of pellicle. Okay, I'm sorry, Doctor Who nerds are coming after me.
Now, then on the other hand, you get Connemara Brewing, who do a lot of open fermentation, if not all of it, and their beers are super clean, like squeaky clean, and they're lagering, and they're doing all sorts. But it's amazing how, keeping out the bad bacteria, keeping the good stuff in, and all of that is just part of a good brewing practice. So shout out to anybody that can do this kind of thing, because most people wouldn't go near open fermentation unless they were trying not to. But pellicles can also, it can remind people of mold. It's not mold, but it kind of looks like mold. It looks like slimy mold. And it almost looks like a kombucha SCOBY in a way, except that it's more sitting across the whole top and not necessarily with an iceberg alien life underneath it.
That's
kind of a strange thing.
Yes, don't have nightmares.
Yeah.
Now weird. I'm thinking of some cosplay now. Okay, I'm having a bad idea. Okay, filing that away. Okay.
Let's move on to our next word. Is krausening? Did I pronounce that right? I don't know what.
Krausening or krausening. So this starts to happen when you are fermenting. In your early fermentation, what starts to happen is that your yeast starts to get very active very quickly. And you start to form on top of your beer that's in your bucket or your carboy quite a interesting looking sediment, kind of bubbly, sort of filmy thing on top of your beer. Now what it's doing is that your yeast is activated. There's a bit of a CO2 bed over your beer, but it's got like high kind of foamy activity. And it just shows that things are going well. It eventually dissipates, and this is a good thing. It eventually kind of dissipates, dissolves, and becomes part of the troop, but it's your initial sign that fermentation is going really well.
There you go.
Yeah, so it's happy beer, at least, or happy will be beer. So.
Ooh, what's a lovey bond?
Lovey bond. It's really just your colors. Yeah, just your color scale. So it's just this great word. I presume someone's name. I should know, but have not looked it up. But I mean, there are so many different sort of color charts, like we were saying before, reading off your beer earlier. But yeah, it's really just how you're making sure that you're at the right point in that color scale for your style. So but I do know some people like to put it on the can too, to say it's whatever Lovibond, and then some people even pour it out and then get very pedantic about being like, but is it? And well, some people have a lot of
Well,
time on their hands.
all
so.
you have to do is measure the wavelength, and you can easily tell.
See.
There you go. Yeah. Oh yeah, because my Hope beer had a color on it. I don't think it's EBC. It's not Lovibond.
It's a different scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beer
So,
color scale or something, but it's the same. It's a different version of the same thing, kind of.
It's exactly that. It's just a different scale. So I use an app called Beer Styles. It's like a BJCP app, and in it there is a color chart. So I'll show you on screen here.
Yeah.
Where you can see the different colors of beer. These are EBC colors, but there is a calculator online where you can go and convert EBC to Lovibond to SRM. So there are at least 3 different charts that you could go with. So EBC4, which is a straw, so your very palest sort of light lagers and potentially blondes, that's an EBC color of 4. For Lovibond, it would be 2.06. For SRM, it's 2.03. So maybe the handiest thing is if you're flipping between them, just sort of slightly double Lovibond and SRM into EBC, but pick one and stick to it for the most part.
Oh my God, it's like shoe sizes. Am I right?
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, exactly.
Could we just have one set, please?
Yes.
Oh,
like,
for
are
real, but
you UK
yes.
shoe size, US shoe size, European? It's like, come on.
Yeah, so we can blame Mr. Lovibond, like most of this kind of thing, late 19th century, they liked to, do this kind of thing.
And name them
Scales were very big, But yeah, I mean, obviously it could only go from what you could, physically see with your human eyes to a greater extent. Before now they can get very, very, like you say, you could just shoot a laser through it and say, what is it really? So yeah. But yeah, it's just a fun name. So there you go. Mr. Lovibond had a fun name. So
yes, he had a fun name, but did he have any chill?
Like
hey, did you like my segue?
I saw where you were going. Oh, that's too fun. So the next one is chill haze, and chill haze is related to, but not the same thing as cold break. So chill haze is when your beer has come out hazy, but it shouldn't have. And often it's got to do with not chilling fast enough, or not using finings, or not. There's a few other things, Lisa. You might also help me out on those ones.
Yeah.
But there's a few things, and it's suspended kind of proteins, yeast, hops that have made your beer look hazy, but they weren't meant to be. So imagine a lager that came out hazy, not the greatest look. For that kind of beer.
I think a lot of them are like temperature related. Like you said, it's about like that, often that cooling process. So everything else you did may be spot on, but you just have a tiny tweak that you might need in, just in that cooling process quite often. So you didn't do anything wrong per se. You just didn't spend enough time in X or Y phase. And some of that you're not going to know because it might work just fine on one day and not another, just depending on your outside temperature and all these other factors that are kind of under control. So,
and sometimes it happens if your beer has been stored very cold, and as soon as the beer warms up a little bit, it kind of goes away.
Yeah, I see,
and that's
that
kind
lot.
of interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. However, some breweries, especially commercial breweries, they'll cold crush the beer, ferment it, do all the things. They'll filter it and chill it very cold, and that almost prevents anything from happening as well. So it's one of those, look, I'm not the expert on a chill haze, but if it doesn't go away when it's warmer, then look at your brewing process for a solve. If it goes away when it's warmed up, keep it at a temperature that you're happy with it at.
Yeah, exactly. Because definitely, I would say almost everything I judged at the homebrew competition had some element of it. But again, like you say, in a lot of them, it did go away once it warmed up, and then that's okay. And again, it's not a huge fault still, like, unless it's really obvious. Like most of the time, though, it's just a thing. It's probably fine. So all good.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons not to drink many beers at such freezing cold temperatures. So
yes, I have to say, I went to a different bar in Belfast, and they gave me one of those frozen glasses where I was like, I've not seen this since like Oh gosh, probably a good
That makes
15
me sad.
years. But I was like,
Oh,
oh, okay.
you entered the time warp.
It kind of did seem like it, but no, it was fun. We had a good time. I actually had a good beer. I got a beer in a bottle, but they said, "Do you want a glass?" And I said, "Sure," not expecting that. And the friend I was with, hello, Paula, kept saying, "Steal the glass, steal the glass." I'm like, "No, we're grown-ups. I'm not stealing the glass." And also, it was frozen. I don't want to steal a frozen glass, but I digress. Don't have frozen glasses, people. There's no point. So.
No, there's no benefit to them.
But then what's the point? What's the point in those novelty beer glasses that are always advertised for Father's Day, never Mother's Day, that you put in the freezer? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I know the ones, yeah.
Yeah.
Because and this is, and I mean this with all the love in the world for commercial breweries, because they do an amazing job of consistently providing beers that taste exactly the same. But a lot of the beers that we drink ice cold, if you warmed them up a little bit, you would taste that they're not really as crisp or as delicious if they're a bit warmer. So it's become a marketing thing to keep them extra cold. If you've seen the taps where it's like frozen over. South Africa was big on that as well. So Castle Light and had frozen tap handles and all the things. It's just become a thing where you're actually hiding the flavor. And if you hide the flavor, you can drink more of it. Because it's not overwhelming your senses. And that's a good thing for a commercial brewery, but it's not what you want for every other beer. Don't be putting an Irish stout in a chilled or frozen glass, please.
No, thank you.
No.
There we go. Tandy has spoken.
Like I've always got, shaking my finger, wagging my finger opinions on this podcast, but someone's got to do some things here.
Right, well, moving on to bunghole.
There we go, last one of the set, I believe.
Because it's so perfect.
I think everybody knows what a bunghole is. We just wanted to say it.
Yeah, that's true. So in casks there is a top of the cask where you're effectively fitting either a cork or a rubber bung. So the bung hole is just the hole where you'd be filling the cask or filling a keg. It's not really a keg thing, it's more of a cask thing or a barrel thing. It's the hole where the cork goes or where the...
And it's as simple as that.
It's the bung, yeah. It's as simple as that.
And it's a real thing. It's just, there it is. It has a funny name. Well, it has a funny name now. It started off as the thing, and then the rest of us were, spent hundreds of years being childish, and here we are. So
we're allowed to sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
And I do feel like everybody at home, if we've missed some particularly funny or interesting words in the beer or brewing space, do let us know, because we can do another series. Another, beer lingo, beer terms, decoded series. But I think that this one was just the fun words, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Andy loves her ticklish words. She called them. I thought that was so cute.
They do. They tickle me. They make me laugh. These words. They're fun.
They are fun. And then there's some. We dropped little knowledge all through. So hopefully, if anyone's just getting into brewing and is like, doesn't really know what some of these things mean, or if you're me and forgets because you don't do certain parts of these things very often, it's good to remind yourself.
And then get put on the spot. And...
it's all good. That's what we do.
No, well, that's it. So, friends, if there are no other words that we want to define, I think we should let all the peeps go and enjoy their day, their evening, their night, wherever they are. If you are brewing, let us know. Send us a photo of you listening to the podcast with your brew day. That would be amazing. We'd love to see it.
Yeah, and if you're watching the Eurovision tomorrow,
Eurovision.
Send us a picture of your parties.
Love to see it.
Indeed. So send us all of your Eurovision pics. Send us your brewing pics. Send us your suggested terms for what you want us to define in only the way that we can define it. Send us all of your suggestions and all of your compliments, complaints, and love all the way to what are we? beerladiespodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at beerladiespod. Literally all the socials, beerladiespod, beerladiespod or beerladies podcast. You can find us everywhere. And Lisa, Katie, thank you so much for bringing your knowledge and bringing your fun to Katie. Katie's smirking and doing things.
You did the chemistry. I just turned up.
Yeah, you've given us arms for attracting and arms for repelling and chemistry terms.
I was just thinking about that, and really, just say hands are positive. No, because a positive and a positive are going to repel. So I'm going to have to think that one is like a claw and one is like a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that
Anyway.
Make it happen.
Once you figure it out, let me know,
It
because
made sense in my head at the time.
you know, my chemistry teacher just didn't even know what to do with me. So yeah. Good times. Okay, well, friends, we'll see you next week, and everybody listening at home will be in your ears next week or on your YouTube screens. Watch us and listen to us wherever you get your pods, wherever you can find a YouTube. We're there. See you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.